Many conservatives grew up being told that communism and socialism are evil and that they don't work. America's education on these topics largely says the same thing. Communism and socialism are depicted as forces that ravage the world. The USSR, China, Venezuela, North Korea, all of these countries are examples of how Marxist thought changed the world for the worse. But is that true? No. Not really. Also, side game, take a shot every time I say capitalism or socialism, though don't blame me if you get alcohol poisoning. I remove myself from that liability. And also, I'm going to be using a different style. This is going to be another step in my experimentation. I am using my phone for this one, so the audio is going to be a little jank because I can't connect my Blue Yeti very much, and the visuals might be a little jank, but it might help me make videos a lot faster because I'm using a teleprompter on my phone. So that might help, but who knows? We'll see at the end of this video and how it turned out. But yeah, without further ado, let's go. I am a socialist. I believe in a socialist society. But what does that mean, really? Socialism is a system in which the capitalist class is abolished and the control over the means of production is given to the workers. This means, in a practical sense, that all companies would be owned and controlled by the workers who work there instead of the executive officers. The property, the machinery, computers, supplies, etc., all of it is controlled by the workers. In this system, each worker in a given company would have equal say in how it is managed. Policy changes, what products they're going to produce, wages, etc., all of it is voted on through a sort of workplace democracy where everyone gets an equal share in the votes. In some cases, private property is abolished, but that doesn't mean that your toothbrush, house, and car are all owned by the state now. No, that's personal property. It also doesn't mean that the government can tell you your workplace or what to do either. That's central planning through federal control. No. These companies and organizations would likely be state-sanctioned, but collectively managed by the workers of these entities. Private property is inherently different to other types of property. Private property is the ownership of property by a private entity. Go figure. It is wholly separate from personal property, public or collective property, and federal property. Under capitalism with private property, workers do not share control in the means with which they produce. Their labor is valued at less than the product itself. Capitalists trade portions of control over various entities and properties and use the capital they gain to reinvest into other entities or projects, none of which workers or the public have any real say in. In short, capitalism is an economic system in which the capitalist class privately owns certain entities and those entities produce goods and services for profit. This profit requirement is vitally important to capitalism's faults, but we'll discuss that later. These definitions of these two systems are incomplete, but they will do for this video, and for the purposes of this video. But in this video, I'm going to respond to various other videos talking about socialism from a capitalist perspective. And the first one that I'm going to do is a video from John Stossel. There are 5 in total, 2 of which are from PragerU, which I'll do last.
Take back our lives from capitalism and greed.
The greed of the fossil fuel industry is literally destroying our planet.
Saving the planet, say these activists, requires socialism, because socialism creates
an environment that provides for all people, not just the privileged few.
This is simply nonsense. Just nonsense.
Tom Palmer, unlike AOC and most of us, has spent lots of time in socialist countries.
We tried socialism, so we ran the experiment. It was a catastrophe. Worst environmental record on the planet.
In China, socialist leaders noticed that sparrows ate valuable grain. So they launched a campaign encouraging people to kill every sparrow.
Billions of birds were killed. It was insanity.
People banged pans and blew horns, scaring the birds into staying in the air for longer than sparrows can tolerate.
These poor birds were exhausted and died and fell from the skies.
Officials with guns shot the birds.
You look at the people who were chasing down and killing the sparrows in the old films, they were into it.
If you failed to show enough enthusiasm for the socialist goals of the party, you are going to be in trouble.
The party's campaign succeeded. People killed nearly every sparrow. But
all it takes is 2 minutes of thinking to figure, wait a minute, who's going to eat all the bugs?
without the birds, insects multiplied and destroyed more crops than the sparrows had.
People starved as a consequence of that.
First of all, even under Mao, China at the time was not socialist. In fact, merely a few short years later, a massive cultural revolution took place, which was caused by latent capitalist tendencies within the central government, not to mention working conditions similar to that of capitalist countries. This cultural revolution sought to preserve communism within China because, in their eyes, it still had capitalist aspects and people in the government that were hidden capitalists. So, even taking from the people that at the time were Marxist, they already recognized that China wasn't truly free from capitalism. Not only that, but this still doesn't have anything to do with Chinese socialism, and it has everything to do with environmentalism and animal rights. It also presupposes that socialism caused it, which makes no sense. How does worker ownership of the means of production cause the government to attempt to exterminate sparrows for whatever reason? The answer is that it simply doesn't. This is also just plain and simply hypocritical. Capitalist countries, including the United States, are leading the world in hunting sharks to extinction for their meat and fins. It's estimated that every year anywhere from 50 to 100 million sharks are killed for these commodities. This is driving them towards endangerment and will eventually lead to extinction. The US has also sanctioned similar campaigns to the Sparrow Campaign. In the 19th century, the North American Wolf Wars started, gaining traction all the way to as late as the 1960s. This nearly eradicated gray wolves in much of the same way that sparrows were almost eradicated in China. This is also done for much of the same reason. So it's just plain hypocritical, and if Chinese socialism is bad because they hunted sparrows, then American capitalism must also be bad because they hunted wolves for much of the same reason, to much of the same effect as well. It didn't help anything.
In reality, socialism means central planning. Over time, that ends badly.
No, this is just not true at all. While socialism is economic in nature, there is no economic model within socialism. Socialism has economic prescriptions with working conditions and the relationship between the worker and the economy, not the production model itself. Socialist economies come in many different forms. Some even use markets just like capitalism. Your central problem is coercion, which is prevalent in all forms of capitalism. Capitalism being state-controlled doesn't suddenly make it socialist. It's still capitalism. So you're really criticizing capitalist central planning, not socialism itself.
What AOC wants to do is basically give the Pentagon or similar agencies control over the entire society. And she thinks that's going to turn out well. It's a joke.
No, this is not at all what she has advocated for. All of her policy positions indicate a belief system where government officials and corporate elites are just as mortal under the law as everyone else. She also talks about the abolishment of economic loopholes that allow for politicians to essentially insider trade with no consequences. She wishes to abolish lobbying, which would help to eradicate corporatism, which empowers people within our democracy. And yes, she does advocate for welfare systems, but that isn't control over society. Stronger democracy through weaker corporations does not mean stronger control over the average person's life. What you're doing is conflating government having greater control over corporate entities with control over the average person's life. In reality, the average person would have greater freedom under a welfare state than they do now. This is a fact that we not only see, but measure. And through our measuring, we found that countries with stronger welfare states have more freedom. This is just a fact about reality.
China's central planners keep making mistakes. Many bodies of water are bright green because fertilizer runoff created algae blooms.
It kills everything.
Socialism creates pollution wherever it's been tried.
We see it in China.
And we saw it in Soviet Russia.
Again, these countries are not socialist. They are state capitalist, but it's true that China is polluting more than the United States does currently in terms of contemporary rate. But we are still emitting roughly half of their total every year, and we have been since 2016. As for Russia, though, Russia has never even come close to our emission rates. Their peak was in 1990 with 2.53 billion tons of CO2. Our height was in 2005 with 6.14 billion tons of CO2. Overall, Russia actually has the lowest total out of the three since China started industrializing further. But even China is starting to taper off. Not only that, but the United States still has the highest amount of emissions produced in totality. The US is standing at 421.91 billion tons, China is standing at 249.35 billion tons, and Russia is standing at only 117.55 billion tons. So no, not only, while China's emission rate is the highest, their total emissions are still vastly lower than even ours. So no, the US is still the worst of the three, and again, China isn't even socialist, so even if they were worse, it wouldn't be to the fault of socialism.
All right, that was then. Now the rules would be different. Now the rule would be green.
Strong government policy, which does not allow the greed and profiteering.
All the time we hear socialists say, well, next time we'll get it right. Next time. How many next times do you get?
Just like capitalism, plenty. All we need is for us to have our first time.
Many, apparently.
What just happened?
Socialist mismanagement led to the disaster at Chernobyl. First response? Lie to the public.
The accident is well under control.
This HBO series is pretty accurate.
Cut the phone lines.
The first thing they did was tell everyone to shut up about it.
Contain the spread of misinformation.
No, state capitalist mismanagement backed by an atom race to create efficient nuclear energy with the US as its rival led to Chernobyl.
Capitalists destroy nature too. Free societies need some government rules to prevent that. But free markets with property rights often protect things better than bureaucrats can.
You get a private farmer. They're concerned about the ability of the farm to grow food next year, year after year after year after 100 years into the future, long after that farmer is going to be gone. Why? Because the farm has a capital value. That's the capital in capitalism. And the consequence is they want to maximize that.
That protects the environment.
This would be great, except industrial farming is horrible for the environment and incentivized by capitalism. Greenhouse gas emissions from industrial cattle farms is a decent portion of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. Not to mention, industrial fertilizers are contaminating surface water areas across the country. Some portions of country are even considered dead zones because of the fertilizer runoff. Normal working class farming is fine and good, but working class farming is what socialists respect. Industrial farming is what capitalism respects. Also, postscript little added bit here. This guy is also completely misdirecting the argument. Capital, and by extension capitalism, massively incentivizes fossil fuel power generation, which is the leading cause of environment damage thanks to pollution and climate change and shit like that. So yeah, we're getting a lot of environment damage just because capitalism is still around, just because of that simple fact. So no, capitalism doesn't really help the environment because capital exists, and capital means that land is good. No, it actually incentivizes bad things because it's a strictly for-profit system.
Also, capitalism creates wealth. When people have enough money that they don't have to worry about starving or freezing, they can afford to protect nature. That's why capitalist countries have cleaner air and water you can swim in.
There are only capitalist countries. The countries you're talking about are just as capitalist as the ones with clean water and air. You're comparing apples to other apples here. Not only that, but the ones with the cleanest water and air have heavy welfare state programs and strong government environmental policy.
And they can afford to pay for wild animal preserves.
When no one has any property rights and people are poor, tigers and elephants are considered a burden and pests.
Yes, almost like the United States with many different types of birds and historically with gray wolves. Next up though, this video's done, so next up we have a campus interview Q&A response video from Andrew Klavan.
I mean, socialism is the idea that you go to work and then somebody more powerful than you decides how to spend your money, which is also the idea of slavery, right? You go to work and somebody more powerful than you, also in a big White House, decides how to spend your money, you know?
This is denotatively not how socialism even works. Socialism operates on a workplace democracy standard in which everyone has equal say in how much any person is getting paid. If by someone more powerful you mean myself and my peers, then sure. But that's not what you mean. We're once again seeing these people criticize socialism by literally describing capitalism. The market, the capitalist market, in fact, is often influenced by people. This means that what is advertised to you, what is available to you, and what products you can even buy from certain stores is all dictated in part by people much more powerful than you. Under capitalism, you don't have free choice. Most stores sell the same things anyways, so you're choosing between a $4 pack of Gala apples from Walmart or a $4 pack of Gala apples from Target. This is the illusion of choice that capitalism provides you. Also, taxes exist in most civilizations. Today, there is not a single country that doesn't have any taxism whatsoever. Some only have corporate tax, some only have income tax, and some only have sales tax. But most, if not all, of Western countries at the very least, have a mixture of all of these. Taxes are not like slavery just simply because the government takes your money. Taxes fund the structure of our government. Without taxes, the government has no money. With no money, it can't function. If it can't function, we no longer have things like roads, a military, a post office, public research and development, public parks, etc. We also have nothing like a railway system, or highways, or freeways, nothing like that. All standardized public infrastructure ceases to be maintained or created without any government funding. And no, corporations taking control of these systems is not better. In fact, it would be significantly worse, not to mention, we have taxes under capitalism. So, even under capitalism, which you are proposing, we still have the more powerful people than you take your money and decide what to do with it. You know, it's just stupid.
That monologue,
and,
yeah.
And the important thing about money is that money is time and time is life, right? You make your money, you paid money for what you do with your time, and your time is all you've got. So if I get to choose how to spend your money, I own your life. I own your life.
Precisely, which is why we should maximize the value of life and time by maximizing the reward you get through trading your time instead of leaving it to corporations to handle how your time and life should be rewarded.
And that's why I frequently, sometimes I'll come to these things and there'll be a lot of hecklers and a lot of protesters. And I always start with one statement. I always start, all I want is for you to be free. And virtually everybody agrees with that. And once you start reasoning from that, what you have to do to be free, and the fact that when people give you money, you're not free anymore. When people give you free stuff, you've lost your freedom.
This is a super common conservative talking point. Anti-welfare sentiments are super common throughout the United States, but with a quick glance at the Global Freedom Index, that can show us that the countries that are the most free are the countries with overwhelmingly strong social safety nets and programs. The United States isn't even in the top 5 of this list, not even in the top 10. We're ranked 29th on the Freedom Index. the top 20 freest countries in the world are all countries with strong and well-funded programs. Most also have pretty good working regulations and conditions. But that's all for Andrew Klavan. His video is pretty unsubstantive, and the rest of it, or at least the other half of the interparts between his points, is just a student talking to him, which prompts his points. But next up, we have a video from
PragerU, because I lost the other video, not to mention it was only 2 minutes, so it wouldn't have added much to the conversation anyway.
Hello, I'm taking this intermission because it's been like 3 months since I started working on this video, and I also have not worked on it in like 3 months, so yeah, my last video was like 4 months ago. Quite a while. It's been quite a minute. But yeah, just that's why my hair is really different. And also like not long anymore. But yeah, so the next channel I'm going to cover is PragerU. I'm going to be covering 2 videos from PragerU, both 5 minutes long. So let's get to it.
In the contemporary world, it's taken as a given that capitalism, with its free market and profit motive, is based on selfishness and produces selfishness, while socialism is based on selflessness and produces selflessness. Well, the opposite is true. Whatever its intentions, socialism produces far more selfish individuals and a far more selfish society than a free market economy does.
Now, this point is already inherently false. The socialist social principle is one of redistribution of resources rather than the hoarding of resources and profit as is in capitalism. A selfish society would not value the Marxist principle, and this current society that we find ourselves in is one such society. Further, socialist thought, and by extension, Marxist thought, is predicated on the idea that workers ought not be exploited and robbed of the outcome of their labor, not as individuals, but as a collective force. A selfish axiom would not allow for an idea that advocates for people getting what they deserve through the right of their labor. Going even further, under capitalism, the capitalist is unjustly entitled to the profit of other people's labor, not their own. And the capitalist is able to do this through the right of their capital, which they've accrued, which in capitalism's world of inherited money, stocks, crypto, and bought ownership, this is not really a reflection of work, rather than it is just a reflection of investment. And we see their power grabbing through things like exploitative practices, wage theft, union busting, and lobbying in corporate interests. These are things that we see materially happening in our world that reflect that kind of bought control and that unjust entitlement. And this is intangibly evident through the studies and meta-analysis that state and prove that the rich will continue to get richer and the poor will continue to get poorer.
And once this widespread selfishness catches on, it is almost impossible to undo it. Here's an illustration. In 2010, the United States President Barack Obama addressed a large audience of college students. At one point in his speech, he announced that young people will now be able to remain on their parents' health insurance plan until age 26. I don't ever recall hearing a louder, more thunderous, or more sustained applause than I did then. Had the president announced that a cure for cancer had been discovered, it is highly doubtful that the applause would have been as loud or as long. But what were they so happy about? To be told that you can now remain dependent on your parents until age 26 should strike a young person as demeaning, not liberating. Throughout American history, and for that matter, all of Western history, the great goal of young people was to become a mature adult, beginning with being independent of mom and dad. Socialism and the welfare state destroy this aspiration.
This is also just false. While the benefits of a welfare state are not intrinsic to socialism, they still allow for younger folks to more easily become independent from their parents. They can achieve independence without worry of becoming bankrupt, being evicted and becoming homeless, or being just forced out by the economy to move back in with mom and dad. The welfare state's goal for young people is for them to become independent, but without the great personal cost that it does in today's world. Under our current system and situation, branching out and becoming independent comes at extraordinary personal risk and deflation of lifestyle, deflation of personal freedom, and high possibility that you will have to move back in with your parents. And even further than that, if everything that Dennis is saying was entirely true, there's no argument presented here that justifies why living with your parents and being home is inherently wrong or should be frowned upon. For most of history, including modern history, families stuck together and the children stayed home and worked. For most wealthy families, the older generation allows the younger generation to stay home and build that wealth under the financial safety of the family home. That's just how things have worked for a long time. For someone obsessed with the nuclear family, it's really weird for you to praise a system that wants to break up the family unit and disavow a system that wants to keep families together. And the fact that he regards all of this as laziness should tell you everything you need to know. This is a propaganda scheme. The poor need to exist under our current system, and keeping people away from financial security is how they do that. This is just propaganda for feeding the machine.
Socialism enables, and as a result produces, people whose preoccupations become more and more self-centered.
Except this is the case with capitalism by design. Most people in the workforce don't work because they want to work. They work because the system enforces the trade of labor for currency in order to not starve to death. In simpler terms, they work because they have to work to survive. Under a socialist welfare state, people would be afforded the opportunity to pursue their aspirations, their goals, their passions, their political and intellectual pursuits, etc. All without the great personal risk, deflation of lifestyle, and detriment to your overall well-being that it does in today's society. Not to mention, capitalists are walking greed goblins, so the whole idea of self-centered preoccupations being put on the working class doesn't really make sense. Yes, some people will become more selfish, but capitalism is contingent on self-centered preoccupations and overall selfishness. A true capitalist with no selfish drive or greed has never existed before.
How many benefits will I receive from the government? Will the government pay for my education? Will the government pay for my health care? What is the youngest age at which I can retire? How much paid vacation time can I get? How many days can I call in sick and still get paid? How many weeks of paid paternity or maternity leave am I entitled to? The list gets longer with every election of a liberal or progressive or left-wing party. And then each entitlement becomes a right.
This point is especially obnoxious because, yes, education, healthcare, retirement, and rest time should all be human rights. Corporations are not entitled to force you to work when you need rest time or want to retire, and the market should not coerce that either. And people should have the right to not go into debt because someone else T-boned them in an intersection. And it is extremely important for the benefit and development of society that everybody is entitled to a free and efficient education, including higher education. Though probably the most obnoxious point is about parental leave. Conservatives are anti-abortionists. They're also very pro-nuclear family, and their main rhetorical strategy for anything is but think of the kids. Yet anytime they have an opportunity to help or protect kids, they reject it, or call it laziness. The hypocrisy is blatant, yet socialists are the selfish ones.
But we're not done. There are even more destructive effects of socialism. Entitlements create citizens who lack a character trait that every human should have: gratitude. You cannot be happy if you are not grateful, and you cannot be a good person if you're not grateful. That's why we constantly tell our children, say thank you. But socialism undoes that. After all, why would a person be grateful for receiving an entitlement? Who's going to be grateful for getting what they're entitled to? So instead of thank you, the citizen of the welfare state is taught to say, What more am I entitled to? Yet the left insists that it's capitalism and the free market, not socialism, that produces selfish people.
This point is probably the most incoherent out of all of these. There's no reason why parents under a socialist system would not be grateful that they can raise their kids without threat of death from market forces. And there's no reason why parents wouldn't teach them about that and the history of fighting for the rights that they are afforded. We do that nowadays with our free education system, so I don't know what you're talking about. In fact, capitalists are the ones that teach people to not be grateful for the benefits they are given because they call it laziness, and they call people who benefit from these accommodations moochers. This sentiment has created a society which does not inherently value the right to essential goods, which is why many people have this mindset. The people who would not be grateful are the people who have this mindset, not the people who advocate for the benefits themselves. The final video in this response collage is PragerU, and it's none other than just simply put capitalism versus socialism. The penultimate video in this collage of responses. So yeah, let's dig in.
Capitalism versus socialism. We can sum up each economic system in one line. Capitalism is based on human greed. Socialism is based on human need, right? No. Wrong. So wrong. It's exactly backwards.
This is simply untrue. The capitalist mode of production is based on profit expansion, which is based on human greed. Any perceived supply and demand is only born from the need to produce profit and supply the company's shareholders with said profit. On the other hand, socialists often advocate for the redistribution of resources through things like welfare. And in practice, this is the case. Welfare states are definitely more left than traditional capitalist states, and those states are born from the idea of redistribution of resources. So even in practice, capitalism still loses here.
The consumer, that's you, has the ultimate power. In effect, you vote with every dollar you spend.
This is not the case. Voting with your dollar is only effective when it comes to mass organization in terms of like mass boycotting. But even then, it's not entirely effective. Voting with your dollar has never been and will never be effective. And not to mention, most boycotts fail anyways. And marketing, PR machines, and corporate propaganda can make sure that the boycott fails due to things like dividing the community. Corporations are generally free to make whatever the decisions they want about their products as long as it doesn't take and grab attention from the larger portions of their consumer base. It's all about numbers and survivability. If they can outlast the boycott, they will, and that boycott will have meant nothing in the long term. How do you think battle passes and microtransactions are still around in video games, even though gamers have been upset with them for about 15 years now because of things like that? Or what about games that release fundamentally broken and still release year after year after year with profit margins that exceed the projections year after year after year? I mean, Christ, the No Man's Sky effect is literally a phenomena within gaming, where games will release broken and unfinished, but get better over time and are therefore worthy of praise because at least the developers stuck it out. It's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that the No Man's Sky effect as a term is still used by companies and game journalist companies that have their hands in the pockets of game companies should tell you that there's some element of intentionality here.
In a socialist economy, the government has the ultimate power. It decides what you get from a limited supply it decides should exist. Instead of millions of people making millions of decisions about what they want, a few people, government elites, decide what people should have and how much they should pay for it. Not surprisingly, they always get it wrong.
This statement alone perfectly displays their big oil-backed stupidity. Socialism fundamentally has nothing to do with the government's power over the economy. It has everything to do with workers and the means with which they produce. As stated earlier, socialism doesn't have an intrinsic economic model. and the government need not have all the power. In fact, most socialists believe in a government model that maximizes democracy, truly a for the people, by the people government style. Some socialists even advocate for an economic model that is just as market-oriented as capitalism, but without the private property. Not to mention, again, central planning is not unique to socialism. China and the USSR are two examples of state capitalism, which is central planning under capitalism. So there's that, but there's also the fact that the idea of a few elites handling and controlling how much you have and how much you should get paid for anything you do is literally what is going on under capitalism in the present day. They can and do manipulate people into changing what they think they want or need, and they literally set the prices for the things that they are selling. The consumer cost of a product is not some extra economic force, it is literally a manageable thing that is manually set by capitalists. There's also the issue of corporatism and lobbying, which contributes to this massively, and gives corporations more control over your life. The reason why healthcare and healthcare products are so expensive and why fossil fuels are still relied on is massively due in part to corporations and corporate lobbying. I mean, hell, PragerU is literally trying to manipulate your thoughts and ideas about socialism right now in this video, and they are literally bought and paid for and backed by oil companies.
Have you ever noticed that late-stage socialist failures always run out of essential items like toilet paper?
It is extremely funny that he's saying this in March of 2019, when merely a single year later, America started running out of toilet paper because of a massive pandemic and a failure in the capitalist market system.
Venezuela, once the richest country in South America, is the most recent example of socialism driving a prosperous country into an economic ditch.
This is just fake history. Venezuela collapsed because they were a petrol state in a global capitalist oil market. Venezuela had 99% of their economy hyper-focused into the oil market when in 2014 the global oil market crashed, and so did too their economy. They put all their eggs in one capitalist basket, and when the basket broke, their eggs cracked, and the cracks of capitalism started to show. Them implementing slightly leftist policies did not ever change the fact that the oil market was always going to collapse, and it did not change the fact that they had 99% of their economy focused onto petrol at the time. So even if they were a perfectly capitalist, perfectly market-oriented economy at the time, it wouldn't have helped anything. It wouldn't have changed the fact that their economy collapsed due to this problem. It wouldn't have happened to change anything. Also, not to mention, this is just, yet again, conflating socialism with social programs. They are two completely distinct things.
But what about Western European countries? Don't they have socialist economies? People seem pretty happy there. Why can't we have what they have? Free healthcare, free college, stronger unions. Good question, and the answer may surprise you. There are no socialist countries in Western Europe. Most are just as capitalist as the United States. The only difference, and it's a big one, is that they offer more government benefits than the US does.
This is a misdirection. Western European companies being socialist is only an idea because anti-socialist propagandists misuse the term. That, or they intentionally misuse the term because they want you to think they're socialist so they can turn around and be like, no, they're actually capitalist. It's capitalism that you're praising. These countries, like he said, are not socialist, but they're also not as capitalist as the US. These countries typically have stronger unions, which means the balance of power between the workers and capitalism is shifted slightly further left, which makes it categorically less capitalist than countries like the US. If you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm saying these countries are better because they are less capitalist.
But only a free market capitalist economy can produce the wealth necessary to sustain all of the supposedly free stuff Europeans enjoy.
This is also just wrong. Yes, they enjoy that stronger welfare state because of capitalism. That is true. But it's not a good thing. The capitalism mentioned here is exploiting the labor laws of other nations to make things in the home state easier and cheaper. Sweatshops, for example. I don't know if you disagree, but that's not a good thing. This enables the home state to have better spending and wealth accumulation while increasing tax revenue, but it's at the cost of the inhumanity of exploiting other nations and their people. This effect can just as well be done without the exploitation, but under a socialist system. Corporations would no longer be able to lobby for higher prices for things like healthcare, power, and housing, which would allow people and even encourage them to spend more money, which circulates more wealth back into the economy. The higher avenues of democracy could also redirect federal spending into things like welfare and education rather than things like the military and the penal system. We could achieve everything that these Western European countries have and more under socialism. It could be a free market too. It could also even be a syndicalist economy. It could even be a planned economy, but where the people decide how the economy runs rather than the government deciding how the economy runs. Planned economy, while also not intrinsic to socialism, also not intrinsic to government planned economy. It could be community planned economy. It could literally be any economic model. Socialism doesn't necessitate or isn't contingent on any of them. But any of these models under socialism would be vastly better than under capitalism, including the free market option. I strive for a world, as a socialist, where people are freer and more able to lead their lives and manifest their destinies. I want everyone to be afforded a slew of opportunities and more. What is the point in living when you're trading your life to do it?